Take this and give me some more pineapple juice. Make it quick." Admiral Diana Thorne shoved her empty glass into Gideon Cole's chest. She tapped her sharp fingernails against his face. Gideon replied coldly, "I do not work here." Diana looked him up and down and laughed bitterly. "What even are you at this base? An oil scrubber or a deck wiper?" Gideon stayed silent and held his sleeping 7-year-old daughter closer to his shoulder. The arrogant admiral did not know the truth. The man she mocked would soon make her stand shaking and salute him before 11:41 tonight. But at 8:23 on that Saturday night, nobody in the Commodore Club ballroom at Coronado saw the storm coming. To understand why Gideon Cole stood so still that night, you have to go back 3 weeks. You have to see the quiet life he built to protect one small girl from the world. His alarm buzzed every morning at 5:12. Gideon rolled out of bed before the sound finished its first note. His feet hit the cold floor of a rented house in Jamul, a dusty little town east of San Diego. He walked past a crooked fence and a dry lemon tree. A rooster somewhere down the road called out into the dark. Inside, the kitchen smelled like old coffee grounds and warm bread. The floorboards creaked under his weight near the sink, a sound he had memorized long ago. He moved through the small space without turning on the main light, careful not to wake his daughter 1 minute early. Gideon packed a lunchbox every single day. Peanut butter on wheat bread, an apple cut into 8 neat slices. He never forgot the slices. His daughter, Ava, liked her apple cut that way and nothing else. Ava was 7 years old. She had her mother's laugh and her father's steady eyes. Her mother had died 3 years earlier, taken by a sickness that moved fast and left no time for goodbyes. Since then, it had only been the two of them. Every night, Gideon read her one chapter from a worn paperback about the ocean. Ava always fell asleep before the end of the page, her small fingers curled against the blanket. Gideon would sit there a while longer, listening to her steady breathing before turning off the lamp. Gideon worked as a dive equipment technician at Naval Base Coronado. He fixed regulators and patched wetsuits in a cramped shop near the water. The air inside always smelled like rubber and salt and old engine grease. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, flickering every few minutes. His hands were rough, covered in small cuts from rusted screws and tight fittings. At lunch, Gideon usually sat alone on a bench outside, watching gulls circle over the harbor. He liked the noise of the base at that hour, the distant clang of metal, and the low hum of boat engines. It reminded him that the world kept moving, steady and simple, without needing him to prove anything to anyone. His paycheck came to exactly $3, $150 a month. It was not much, but it was steady, and steady was what mattered now. His co-workers at the base knew him as a quiet man who fixed things well and left early to pick up his daughter. Nobody asked many questions. Gideon liked it that way. He answered in short sentences and kept his eyes on his work, letting the hiss of compressed air fill any silence. Nobody at the base knew what Gideon used to do. Nobody knew about the metal box hidden under his bed. Inside that box sat 2 medals, a folded flag, and a cracked rifle scope that no longer worked. The metal had gone cold and dull with age. Gideon kept the lid shut most nights. Some nights, though, his shoulder ached in a strange, deep way. The ache started deep near the bone and spread slowly outward. Cold weather always brought the pain back. It reminded him of nights he tried hard to forget. He had chosen this small life on purpose. A quiet man, fixing quiet machines, raising a daughter who never had to see him break. That piece nearly ended on a damp Tuesday afternoon. At 4:15, a courier walked into the dive shop and asked for Gideon Cole by name. He held out a thick envelope, colored deep royal blue, with a gold seal pressed into the flap. The seal read Pacific Fleet Warrior Foundation. Gideon wiped grease from his fingers before he opened it. The paper felt heavy and smooth against his rough skin. Inside was a single gold card. It read, Gideon Cole, Guest of Honor. No rank. No old code name, just his name, printed clean and plain. A normal ticket to this same gala cost $250. His card had no price on it at all. Gideon stared at the card for a long moment. His stomach tightened. A dull pressure built behind his eyes. He did not want this. He hated rooms full of polished shoes and empty compliments, rooms where people measured a man by the shine on his shoes. He folded the card once and slid it into his back pocket, planning to forget it existed by morning. He did not get the chance. Ava found the card that same night while looking for a hair clip in his jacket. Her eyes went wide. "Daddy, is this a real party? On a real Navy ship place?" She bounced on her toes, breathless with excitement, her socks sliding on the wood floor. She had heard his old stories about the deep blue ocean 100 times, and now she wanted to see where they came from. She held the gold card up to the lamplight, admiring the shine of it like a small treasure. "Can we go, please?" she asked again, tugging at his sleeve. Gideon felt his chest grow tight. He wanted to say no, but her small, hopeful face made the words stick in his throat, and he only managed a slow nod. Ava threw her arms around his waist and squeezed, her cheek pressed against his shirt. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and warm blankets. Gideon closed his eyes for a moment, wondering how one small promise could feel so heavy. That night, after Ava fell asleep, Gideon pulled the metal box out from under the bed. Dust rose in the lamplight as he lifted the lid. He lifted the cracked rifle scope and turned it slowly in his hands. Memories rushed back like cold water through a broken window. October 14th, 2015. A ridge in the Hindu Kush Mountains, buried under snow. His team, trapped in a stone gully, surrounded on every side. Radio static screaming in his ear. A blizzard that swallowed every sound except his own heartbeat. He remembered the exact taste of ice on his lips that night, and the way his rifle stock felt frozen against his cheek. A young soldier named Danny had screamed his name through the static over and over, begging him to find a shot. Snow had piled against his shoulder, heavy and silent, while gunfire cracked somewhere below the ridge. Gideon had held his breath for 11 long seconds before he pulled the trigger 5 times. He had never told anyone what that silence felt like afterward when the shooting stopped and only the wind remained. It was the kind of silence that stayed with a man long after he came home. Some nights he still woke expecting to hear that radio crackle again, and some nights the quiet of his own bedroom felt almost too loud. His heart pounded now just thinking about it. It hit 114 beats a minute, fast and hard against his ribs. His palms went damp. His throat closed like a fist around his voice. The bedroom walls seemed to press in closer around him. Gideon shoved the box back under the bed. He decided, right then, to skip the gala. He would protect Ava from that world, and protect himself from it too. He would not let a room full of strangers watch a quiet man fall apart. The next afternoon, Gideon drove to see an old friend. Clint Atwood ran a small boat repair shop near the marina, 3 streets from the water. Salt air mixed with diesel fumes drifting off the docks outside. Clint was 61, with a heavy limp from a titanium leg he never talked about much. He had trained Gideon long, before either of them wore gray hair. Clint looked up from a boat engine, sweat dripping down his neck and onto his collar. He wiped his hands on an old towel and studied Gideon's face for a moment. He saw the look right away. Old friends always know. "You planning to hide in Greece and rust forever, Reaper?" Clint asked, tossing him a rag. "Ava's going to grow up thinking her daddy only scrubs rust off old hulls." Gideon said nothing. He gripped the rag tight in his fist, the rough fabric scratching against his palm. "That invitation ain't an accident," Clint added, lowering his voice. "Somebody up top remembers what you did out there. Don't let pride talk you out of standing in that room." Clint walked into the back room and returned holding a navy blue blazer, pressed and clean on a wire hanger. The fabric still smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. "Wear this," he said. "Walk through that door with your chin up." Not for them. For her. Gideon took the blazer without a word. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the smooth fabric. He held it against his chest, testing the weight of it before folding it carefully over his arm. Saturday came fast. At 8:10 that evening, Gideon parked his old 2012 pickup truck outside the Commodore Club gate. A young guard named Toby checked the guest list twice. When he found Gideon's name, his eyebrows shot up for half a second. Then he waved the truck through without another word. At the gate, Toby had waved them through without a second glance, but Gideon caught him staring in the mirror as they drove past. Something about the name on his list had clearly stuck in the young guard's mind. Gideon carried Ava through the tall wooden doors, her small arms wrapped around his neck. Inside, the world changed completely. Crystal chandeliers dropped warm gold light over the room. The smell of red wine mixed with clashing perfumes and starched fabric. Somewhere near the band, a saxophone played low and slow. Over 150 officers stood in crisp white uniforms, medals gleaming across their chests. Heads turned as Gideon walked past. Some officers stared too long. Some looked away too fast. A waiter carrying a silver tray nearly stopped mid-step to watch him pass. Gideon felt every eye like a weight pressing on his shoulders. He held Ava a little tighter and kept walking, his worn shoes quiet against the polished floor. Near the center of the room stood Admiral Diana Thorne. She was 43 years old, sharp-eyed and confident. Her crisp white uniform fit her like armor. Two junior officers hovered near her, laughing at every word she said. Diana had built a career on command and control. She ran special operations forces across the entire Pacific Fleet, and she never let anyone forget it. She judged people fast, usually by the first 3 seconds she saw them. Her sharp eyes had learned to sort a room into ranks before she said a single word, and she rarely bothered to look twice. She had earned her stars through discipline and grit. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing the people underneath the uniforms they wore, or the lack of one. At exactly 8:23, Diana spotted Gideon near a quiet hallway corner. Ava had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her small hand curled near his collar. Diana's eyes swept over Gideon's blazer, worn soft at the elbows. She made her decision in half a second. She marched over, heels clicking sharp against the marble floor. "Take this and get me some more pineapple juice. Make it quick." She shoved her empty glass into Gideon's chest and tapped her sharp fingernails against his face, like he was furniture that had wandered too close. Gideon looked down at the glass, then back at her. "I do not work here," he said, his voice calm and low. Diana looked him up and down and laughed, sharp and bitter. "What even are you at this base? An oil scrubber or a deck wiper?" Her voice carried across the hallway. Nearby officers turned to watch, then quickly looked away, unwilling to cross her. A young lieutenant near the drink table lowered her glass and stared at the floor, her cheeks flushed with quiet embarrassment. An older officer near the wall cleared his throat, but said nothing at all. Nobody stepped forward to speak up. The silence around Gideon felt heavier than any shout could have been. Gideon's jaw tightened under his skin. A vein pressed faintly at his temple. His fingers curled slowly at his side. But he thought of the small, sleeping weight on his shoulder, and he swallowed every word rising in his throat. He had promised Ava they would be home by 10 to read her favorite book. He would not let this woman steal that promise from her. He simply turned, walked to a quiet corner, and sat down without a sound. He set the empty glass on a side table, careful not to let it clink too loud. From across the room, Clint watched everything happen. He crossed the floor slowly and stood beside Gideon, resting a rough hand on his shoulder. "Hold your wind steady, Reaper," Clint murmured, using the old sniper phrase between them. "Don't let the target pull your aim offline." Gideon exhaled, long and slow. His shoulders dropped an inch. The storm inside him settled, just barely, just enough. "She don't know a thing about you," Clint added quietly. "Let her keep thinking whatever lets her sleep tonight." Gideon almost smiled at that. Almost. He shifted Ava a little higher on his shoulder. He looked out toward the tall windows, where the last orange light of evening faded over the water. At 9:02, Gideon carried Ava out to the balcony to escape the noise. Cool salt air rolled in off San Diego Bay. Somewhere far off, a Navy carrier sat quiet against the dark water, its lights blinking in slow rhythm. Waves slapped softly against the dock below, a steady sound that almost calmed him. Gideon stared out at the black water, turning something over in his mind. Diana's voice kept echoing in his skull. Sharp, commanding, familiar in a way that made his stomach drop. He had heard that exact voice before, screaming through a cracked radio 11 years ago in a blizzard on a mountain ridge. That voice had begged for rescue, while her team froze under enemy fire. That voice belonged to the field commander, who led 9 soldiers into a trap that night. He remembered the static crackling, then a woman's voice breaking through, ragged with fear, calling out coordinates through chattering teeth. He had never seen her face. He had only heard that voice over and over in his nightmares for years afterward. The woman who had just called him a deck wiper was the same woman he had once bled in the snow to save. Gideon's hands went cold despite the warm night air. Goosebumps rose along his forearms. He said nothing to Clint. He only held Ava a little closer and walked back inside, his mind spinning with the weight of what he now knew. At 9:30, the ballroom lights dimmed for the main program. Diana Thorne stepped up to the podium, her voice booming through the speakers with practiced confidence. She spoke about courage, about sacrifice, about true leadership forged only in real combat. Then her eyes drifted toward the dark corner where Gideon sat. Real leadership, she said, letting a small smile curl at her lips, is not built in engine rooms or on scrub duty. It is forged where real soldiers bleed. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Clint, seated nearby, shook his head slowly and muttered something under his breath. A few officers near the back shifted uncomfortably, sensing something was off, though none of them understood why yet. Gideon's fingers curled around the edge of his chair. His knuckles turned pale white against his dark skin. Anger burned low in his chest, hot and heavy. Heat crawled up the back of his neck, but he looked down at Ava's peaceful sleeping face and let the anger pass through him like a wave hitting rock. He let the old warrior inside him go quiet. In its place, something steadier remained. At 9:45, the master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, tapping it twice for attention. The room fell silent. He announced a special honor, newly declassified at the highest level. The room leaned forward, curious. He began reading details from a mission called Operation Red Autumn. 9 soldiers trapped in a rocky gully. Temperatures dropping to 14 degrees below zero. No air support. Minutes left before the entire team would be lost. One lone sniper, positioned on the southern ridge, had ended the enemy assault alone. At the VIP table, Diana's confident smile began to freeze. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass. The story sounded too familiar. Too close to a night she had spent 11 years trying to forget. Her mind flashed back to the sound of her own voice screaming into a dead radio. The announcer kept reading. The lone marksman, known only by his code name, saved the entire team from certain death that night. 5 shots, 14 seconds, 1,550 yards through a blinding storm. Diana's hand started shaking. Wine trembled at the edge of her glass, a small red ripple catching the light. She set the glass down before it could spill, her breath coming shorter now. Every officer near her table had gone quiet, sensing the tension rolling off their commander. Nobody dared to ask why her face had lost its color. Brody, the junior officer seated beside her, leaned over and whispered, "Admiral, are you feeling all right?" Diana did not answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the podium, waiting for the next word to fall like a hammer. "Please welcome tonight's honored guest," the announcer said. former Special Operations sniper Gideon Cole. The entire ballroom went silent. 150 officers held their breath at once. Every head turned toward the dark corner of the room. Diana felt the floor tilt beneath her polished shoes. The tired man she had mocked, the one she called a deck wiper, was the ghost she had hunted for 11 straight years. She had searched 100 Pentagon hallways for his name. Gideon rose slowly and shifted Ava into Clint's waiting arms. Ava stirred but did not wake. Her small fists still curled against Clint's collar. Gideon straightened the sleeves of his borrowed blazer. Then he began walking through the crowd, past the same faces that had laughed at him 20 minutes earlier. Those faces had gone pale now, drained of color, frozen in place like statues. Not one glass clinked. Not one shoe scraped the marble floor. Somewhere near the ceiling, the air conditioning hummed a low, steady note, the only sound left in the entire room. A single fork, forgotten on a table edge, wobbled once and went still. Gideon walked with his shoulders square and his eyes forward, the same calm stride he once used crossing open ground under enemy fire. He passed the young lieutenant, who had looked away earlier, and she straightened up, eyes wide, as if seeing him for the first time. He passed Diana's table, where her 2 junior officers had gone stiff and silent, unsure where to look. Each step echoed faintly against the high ceiling. The distance to the stage felt longer than it truly was, stretched thin by 150 pairs of eyes. He kept his gaze forward, the way he always had, focused only on the next step and the one after that. Gideon stepped up onto the stage at 9:55. The announcer handed him a plaque, and Gideon reached up to pull back his left sleeve. Under the bright stage lights, a tattoo appeared on his wrist. An old compass wrapped around a small skull, with Roman numerals marking missions few people would ever hear about. It was the mark every sniper in the community would recognize on sight. A murmur rolled through the crowd, officers leaning toward each other, pointing at the ink glowing under the spotlight. Somewhere in the back, a glass finally slipped from someone's fingers and shattered against the floor, but nobody even turned to look. All eyes stayed fixed on the quiet man, standing under the bright stage lights. Diana's knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the VIP table to stay standing. Her breath caught somewhere deep in her throat, refusing to move. Her ears rang, drowning out the murmurs around her. She stepped away from her table, her legs trembling with every step. She crossed the open floor toward the stage, the whole room watching in stunned silence. She stopped in front of Gideon, her eyes glassy, with tears she could no longer hold back. "I owe you my life," she said, her voice cracking. "I owe you every ounce of honor I have." And 20 minutes ago, she could not finish the sentence. Her voice broke apart completely. The clock read 11:41 when Diana straightened her spine, lifted her trembling hand, and gave Gideon a full, formal military salute. Tears slid down her cheeks and dropped onto her white uniform. She held the salute steady, refusing to lower her arm, standing in front of the entire fleet she commanded. Her voice, when it came again, was barely a whisper. "I called you a deck wiper. You were the reason I got to go home to my own children." Gideon looked at her with quiet, steady eyes. He had seen storms far worse than this one. Slowly, he lifted his own hand and returned the salute. The ballroom erupted into applause that lasted nearly 4 full minutes. Glasses clinked in celebration instead of judgment now. Officers who had laughed minutes earlier now stood clapping, some wiping their own eyes. Clint stood near the back, holding Ava, a small proud smile breaking across his weathered face. Even the young guard Toby, who had checked Gideon's name at the gate, clapped from the doorway with a wide grin. 6 months passed after that night at the Commodore Club. Sunlight poured over the small town of Jamul on a warm afternoon. The air smelled of dry grass and sunscreen. Gideon stood at a community archery range, guiding a group of local kids through their first shots. Laughter rang out across the dusty field every time an arrow hit the target. A soft breeze carried the sound of bowstrings snapping, steady and calm. A black SUV rolled to a stop near the fence. Diana Thorne stepped out, dressed in simple street clothes instead of her white uniform. No medals, no rank insignia, just a woman carrying a small wooden box under her arm. She paused at the gate, watching Gideon laugh with the children before she approached. She walked over and handed Gideon the Navy Cross, framed behind clean glass, delayed for 11 long years by paperwork nobody had bothered to finish. Beside it, she offered a donation check made out for exactly $12, for $150, meant for the youth archery program Gideon had built from nothing. The kids call it Reaper's Range now, Gideon said, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Guess the name finally caught up with me. Diana laughed softly, a Rayal laugh this time, nothing like the sharp, bitter sound from that night. It suits you better than it ever suited the man in that ballroom. Gideon studied the check, then looked up at her. Neither of them needed to say much more. They shook hands firmly under the shade of an old oak tree, two people who had finally closed a distance 11 years wide. Ava came running across the field, her sneakers kicking up small clouds of dust, and threw her arms around her father's waist. She pointed toward a small photo sitting on their living room shelf back home. It showed an admiral bowing her head in salute to a quiet man in a worn blue blazer. "That's my daddy," Ava said proudly, looking up at Diana. "He saves people." Diana knelt down to Ava's height and nodded slowly. "Yes, he does. More than you'll ever know." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver arrowhead pin, pressing it gently into Ava's palm. "For the bravest kid at this range," she said, and Ava's whole face lit up with a wide, gap-toothed smile. Nearby, Clint leaned against the fence, watching the whole scene with quiet satisfaction. He had known, long before that gala night, that the truth would find its way to the surface eventually. Truth like that never stayed buried for long. Ava ran off to shoot another arrow, her laughter carrying across the field one more time. Gideon watched her go, feeling the old ache in his shoulders settle into something softer than pain. It felt, for the first time in years, almost like rest. Diana stood beside him, while longer, watching the children line up their shots one by one. "You built something good here," she said quietly. "Better than anything I built with all my stars." Gideon shrugged, a small, easy motion. "Just wanted somewhere for kids to feel steady," he said. "Same as I once did." The late afternoon sun dipped lower, over the hills, painting the dry grass gold. Somewhere behind them, an arrow struck the target dead center, and the children cheered. Gideon watched the two of them for a moment, the warm sun on his shoulders, the sound of arrows finding their mark behind him. He was no longer an invisible ghost in anyone's eyes. He was simply a father, standing in the sun, finally at peace.